Hello. Hi, good evening, and welcome to a brand new year of exciting events here at the University of Aberdeen. My name is Barbara Gorgoni, and I'm part of the Public Engagement with Research Unit at the university. So, this is the first Cafe Med of the new series, and you'll find on your tables the program of this new series. You'll see there's loads of really interesting topics. I also have an announcement regarding Cafe Sai. For those of you who have been before, we will be at a brand new venue next month. We've had to move from Cafe Tempo because it's temporarily closed. So we will be in the Belmont Cinema downstairs in the Kino Bar. And we're very much hoping that that will be our home for quite a while now. And we'll be settled there. So the flyers for Cafe Sai are being printed, but the first event will be on Wednesday, the 6th of February, with the title, Healthy Eaters, How Do They Do It? So again, very interesting topic, and hope to see you there. You'll also find feedback forms on your tables. Please fill them in and use the pens provided. You're free to keep the pens as well. It's really important that we hear your views on the events that we run. And just one final thing, the Cafe Med will be filmed again today, and the video will be available in a couple of days on our Facebook page and on the website as well. Okay, so to tonight, it's a great pleasure to welcome our two speakers, Dr. Louise Johnson and Dr. Taraka Gunaratne. They're both consultant psychiatrists at NHS Grampian, and they will be talking about the effects of social media on mental health. The format, excuse me, is the usual. There'll be a short presentation, and then we will have a break. You can get more refreshments from the cafe, and then we'll open to your questions. So keep all your questions for after the break. And now, okay, so I'll pass over to Dr. Gunaratne. Thank you.
Well, good evening. How are you? Good. All right. We're happy to be here. Thank you very much for the intro. My name is Taraka Gunaratne, and I am a consultant psychiatrist for children and adolescents. What that means is that I decided to become a doctor, and I pursued that route, and then I became a doctor of the mind. I treat people with medicines and for their mind, and then I subspecialize in the treatment of young people, so under 18s. And the reason that I'm here for the next 15 minutes is to lay a bit of a general foundation around things, social media, young people, and mental health. A foundation that I hope will provide some kind of platform for my colleague, Dr. Johnson, to speak more specifically about eating disorders. Now, I have to say, just to begin with, that I'm not a social media expert. I think being an expert of social media must be a very, very difficult title to achieve, because social media is never really the same today as it will be tomorrow and the day after, because actually it's not a static entity. It's always dynamic, isn't it? The way that technology is evolving at such a rate just baffles us. And I think what's relevant to all of us here is that it has some kind of impact either on our own lives directly or on those that we know, particularly young people. How many in the room have some kind of sense that actually social media may be a bit of a public or political concern when it comes to mental health? Just by way of show of hands, how many of us think that? Okay, so pretty much the whole room think that this is an applicable topic to think about. So, one of the things I just want to do is just have a look at some of the conversations around some of the negative effects that social media has on mental health with young people, but also the positive effects. And the reason that we're going to do this in a balanced way is because that's life. You know, people often ask me, Dr. Gunaratne, is social media bad for young people? Is it bad for mental health? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And really, I don't think you can dichotomize it. If you think about it, you could ask the same question with paracetamol. Is paracetamol a good thing or a bad thing? Well, you can use it and it could be a good thing, but you could misuse it and it could be a bad thing. a medicine in misuse can become a poison. And the same goes with social media. It's not really the question about whether it's good or bad. I think that's a flawed question. I think the question really is, what would be a good use of social media? What would be a bad use of social media? Does that make sense? Okay, right. So I came across this document here. It's from the Center of Mental Health. It's a briefing. Number 53, if you're taking notes, social media, young people, and mental health. And what it does is it rings up basically a raft of evidence and research out there on all things social media, young people, and mental health. And it addresses the issue both in the negative effects and the positive effects. I read through it and I thought actually some of these are quite relevant, pertinent, and interesting. So I thought I'd maybe just share them with you to stimulate some conversation later on. Number one, okay, one of the negative effects of social media, recognized, potentially, is addiction. Addiction, okay? That thing that happens to us when we become hooked on something and we start to lose all voluntary control over our behaviors, over our intentions, our decisions, and actions. What has been recognized is that social media, when we use it or overuse it, can drive us to the point where we have a sense of dependence on it, where we need to check, and then check again, and then just check again, and check, and check, and check, and check, and check. Okay? So people recognize that as an urge to check posts. Also, we have notifications that pop off. And actually, when we check social media, it's a bit of a gamble. Sometimes you have a good result when you check. Maybe someone likes you. Maybe someone has said something nice about you or has made you laugh. But sometimes you can have something that makes you annoyed, makes you down, sad, depressed. It's a bit of a gamble. But we know, don't we, that when there's uncertainty in the mix, that can sometimes increase our drive to engage with that behavior. It reinforces our behaviors. Well, why is addiction a problem in young people? Well, common sense stuff, really. If you're always on your phone, then you're not doing other things. What are the other things? For young people, it might just be connecting with the real world. I was speaking to a colleague of mine today who's a nurse in under 18 psychiatry, and she said that social media is seen as an escape from the real world. But because social media is so trending, the real world now is perceived as an escape from social media. Okay, so we can be addicted to being in this virtual world, which means that we don't feel so good when we're not checking. You may have heard of the acronym FOMO. This is the phenomenon, fear of missing out, and that actually we alleviate the anxiety in us when we fear that we are missing out by checking and checking and checking again. Another issue or negative effect of recurrent checking, of course, is not going to bed on time. And that's really important with young people because sleep, as it is for young people and adults, is one of the strongest drivers for mental well-being. Sleep is. And we all know, don't we, that when we sleep well, we're better through the day. And when we don't, we're grouchy, we're irritable, and sometimes we're a bit more vulnerable to physical illness, to picking up a cold, etc., etc. There's lots of good regenerative powers of sleep on our physical body and also on our mental well-being, on our memory consolidation, etc., etc. Why is that important for young people? Well, young people have an educational life, don't they? And what they do with their educational life often, not always, but often, becomes a trajectory that they set for the rest of their life with their careers and how they socially develop, etc., etc. So there's an issue. Another issue that has come up is the issue of comparison. And that when we are checking social media, we're actually looking at the lives of other people and the desirability of other lives, and then that makes me feel my inadequacies or my perceived inadequacies, and so that has a negative effect on how I feel. How might that affect me? Well, it might affect me my self-esteem, my confidence, my ability to be happy with who I am as a person, how I look. I'll leave this more to Dr. Johnston. She may speak a bit more about image, but image obviously is an issue when actually all you have to make a judgment about somebody is a photograph. And we know that comparison can be healthy for competition, but we also know that comparison kills. And so that there is something in that to be aware of when we are viewing the life of the Joneses through social media. A few other things that relate to this: jealousy. Why isn't my life like theirs? It's not fair. Envy. These can all be very, very powerful negative emotions that can affect our mental health in a negative way, i.e. depression, anxiety, social withdrawal, and of course cyberbullying. A lot have heard of cyberbullying. I was interested to find out that cyberbullying may not be as prevalent as we think, but where it is prevalent, it's an issue. Some of the studies have shown that cyberbullying is still a minority activity compared to traditional forms of bullying. Some studies have shown that this is, of 100,000 young people, 1% report that they've been cyberbullied, but a third report that they've been bullied in a traditional way. But what can be done online now can be, without creative limit now. Photographs can be manipulated, faces can be spliced on other bodies, the list goes on and on and on. And if you were a victim of cyberbullying, it can be very, very damaging indeed for that young person's life. And we see these kinds of people in our clinics. But. We have to be balanced about this. Remember, social media is not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's how we use social media that determines whether it's good or bad, healthy or unhealthy for our mental health. In terms of the positive effects of social media, very well recognized effect is that it helps us create social relationships. Now, I know that for many of us in the room today, it may not feel like real social relationships, but nonetheless, social media does involve connecting with other human beings in a particular way, albeit not necessarily face-to-face or offline, as it's called, but in a way, maybe through a tweet, maybe through a text, maybe through a picture, a video, and the list goes on. So increasing social real estate or constructing social real estate is a positive benefit of social media. If you think about it now, many of you are Skyping your children or your grandchildren across the other side of the world. We couldn't do that 30 years ago. These are definitely benefits. Another perceived benefit of social media is that we now have greater access to care and are able to receive education, information, and even therapy when without this platform or ability to connect online, you may be on a waiting list or not getting the help that you need anyway, because actually it's a scary thing to ask for help. So now we have online therapists. We have online communities where you can be an anonymous online user of a platform sharing stories and sharing honest insights into your predicament with other people that are suffering in a similar way. We know that now this is perhaps a proponent of what we call realistic medicine. Here in NHS Grampian, hopefully, by 2025, is my understanding, we would have more of a realistic medicine culture, meaning that those that need help get help when they need it, where they need it, and instead of having to go to hospital, can have direct access or access through non-hospital routes where possible. Would that be a good thing? Yeah, I think it could be. And this again is yet another potential positive use of social media. So, I have just highlighted a few potential positive and negative effects of social media on the emotional and mental well-being of young people. By no means have I been completely exhaustive. This is only a 15-minute slot, and just something to whet your appetite and stimulate discussion for later on. In summary, what this report found was that the arguments for and against, or pro-mental health or anti-mental health, are mixed. And there is no clear definitive on the hours that you must be spending on and offline, or the types of social media that you must or must not be using. That is up for debate, it's up for conversation. So I hope this has been of some use to you, and look forward to discussing this more in the time for open forum chat. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tarika. That was a really helpful introduction, and I think you've really highlighted a lot of the things that I'm hoping we'll be able to sort of speak about in a more specialised way, thinking about eating disorders. So, introduction to me. I'm Louise Johnston. I'm a consultant in the Eden unit, which is a 10-bed unit, inpatient unit up at Cornhill Hospital in Aberdeen. We cover Grampian, we also cover Highland and Tayside. So we have quite a wide catchment area. So it's quite specialised, and we do get some very unwell patients coming through our doors. And I think before that I worked in outpatients as well, and I have worked in CAMS. So as well, like Taraka, what I would say is I'm not an expert in social media either. I would say I'm very interested in how social media impacts on our lives, partly because I'm a parent, and I think parents, I think generally, you speak to people in the school gates and everybody is concerned, interested, and trying to think, how can we support young people to use social media in a helpful way and not in a way that's going to impact negatively on their health. And I think, Taraka, you've just kind of hit the nail on the head there that, this is something that's here to stay, perhaps not in its current form, but it is with us. And I think, for me, we can't just stop using it. We can't just ban it. We can't say, we're not going to do this anymore. We have to use it and embrace it in a way that is healthy. So I guess that's the standpoint that I'm coming at it from. Also, I'm very interested in the effects that it has on my patients. And I think, one of the things that I'm going to talk a little bit about is what we do in the unit to try and support our patients, to try and help them using social media. So I guess for those of you who maybe don't know or don't have a knowledge of eating disorders, what I'm talking about when I speak about eating disorders are anorexia nervosa, which is primarily a weight-losing, intake-restricting and exercise disorder, and bulimia nervosa, which is more around periods of overeating and then compensation with, for example, purging, vomiting, using laxatives. They're disorders that really are quite crippling and very disabling and can be life-threatening. There is a significant mortality involved. So, we're talking about illnesses that are very, very serious. There obviously is a spectrum, and there are the less severe end of the spectrum as well. And obviously, the reason that I think social media has become such an issue in terms of eating disorders is because one of the core features of these illnesses is about body image. Obviously today, the scope of this, I'm not going to be talking to you too much about the pathology involved in eating disorders, but one of the core features is around body image. And as Taraka alluded to, one of the things that obviously social media impacts on is body image. And where we're at with research in terms of eating disorders now, I think there aren't studies that say social media is bad for eating disorders or social media causes eating disorders. That is not the case. Eating disorders are complex. The etiology is very complex. There are a number of factors: genetic factors, social factors, neurological factors that are all involved in causation of eating disorders, and we don't fully understand that. So we can't say it's all because of the media or it's all because of social media. What we do know is that the media, social media, has an impact on body image. We know that spending time on Facebook, for example, comparing yourself to other people, looking at images that have been photoshopped or digitally enhanced, affects how you feel about yourself and your self-image. And so obviously that is the area of concern. Anorexia has been around since the 8th century, so we're not talking about an illness that has been caused by glossy magazines or social media. But I think we live in the modern age, and obviously these kind of technologies have a big role to play. So I guess where I'm coming at this from is I'm a relatively new consultant to the unit. I took up post in October. Before that, I'd worked in outpatients, and the unit, I have worked in the unit before, and I'm very proud to work there. It's an excellent unit where really very, very difficult work is done and very skilled staff. And before I arrived there, there'd been some work done around Facebook and around social media. And I think also some of the staff, some of whom are here today, had noticed that social media was becoming an increasing problem. Patients were coming in with their phones and checking their social media profiles, and that was causing them distress. You may have heard of pro-anorexia websites. There are websites that encourage body image checking and things, and that can be really difficult. So I guess the staff in the unit thought, well, what can we do to try and help people with that? How can we manage that? There was some research done by a researcher who was visiting the unit, who looked at different centres in the UK and compared Facebook use. And that really, I think, stimulated the debate and some action points from that. So there were a few things that the staff did. One of them was they tried to come up with a draft policy on what can we do, to help people. There was discussion within the unit with the patients, involving them in, what help would they like, and also coming up with a social media group. So essentially what happens with the patients is that when they come into hospital, obviously we can't take away their phones and tablets and things. We couldn't just, remove them. But we can ask patients to voluntarily either surrender them or give them to family members, leave them at home. And we ask patients to do that. There are occasions for patients who are detained under the Mental Health Act. And that, again, is another debate for another day. But there are patients who, if we feel they're particularly at risk from using devices, we can take them away against the patient's wishes, and that's all done in a very strict legal framework. So essentially what we're looking for when patients come in is we would ideally like them to surrender their devices so that they're not tempted, because the way I think is helpful to think about eating disorders, particularly anorexia, is they're much more like OCD, obsessional compulsive disorder, in that when you have an eating disorder, it's all about the weight losing behaviours. It's all consuming. It's completely, when Tarika was talking about addiction, it is a bit like that. That becomes your main focus in life. And so, anything like, for example, a social media post about your friend who's gone out to a birthday party, all the anorexic thinking will allow you to do is to compare yourself to that picture and think, I'm not as thin or as beautiful or as, attractive as that person is in that photograph. And it's often a really distorted view as well. So what we do is we try and encourage patients to give up their devices when they come in. They get a range of therapies, again, which I won't go into just now, but as part of that, what we're trying to do is we're obviously trying to treat the illness, which is the most important thing. Make sure from a physical point of view, a psychological point of view, people are as well as they can be. And then as they become a little bit more able to think and to consider discharge and to consider what their life might be like, and to support their recovery in lots of ways, not just thinking about social media, but we, the staff in the unit started running a group, a social media group, which involved a number of sessions which the patients would attend together, obviously, supporting each other, and thinking about, social media, what role does it play in your life? And I think, the one thing that I have in my mind is how can we make this, which is a part of everyday life, how can we make this a positive part? How can we take back that control and make this into something that's helpful? And the phrase that I've come across in my reading has been about curating a social media profile that works for you, not the other way around. So if patients are really keen to stay on social media and really keen to use it, then how can they develop ways of using it to help themselves? And I guess, so part of the group is around devising what the staff have called a social media action plan, and that is around identifying what you do currently and then how can you change that to make it healthier and more focused on recovery than focused on illness. And so and I say we because obviously having joined the team, I think I've kind of hopefully joined in with this and tried to make this part of our overall package that the patients can then go on to be discharged, and we can continue to support them. What we're looking at is things like, obviously there's the social media apps such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, those kind of things. There's also the fitness tracking apps, which are a big problem for some of our patients. So we try and obviously include all of that. The other sort of area that Tarika touched on is around therapy and around using social media for therapy. And I know there are programs in the country that use social media platforms that they have devised as a sort of online therapy group. And I think they're not particularly widely used, but there are examples throughout the country where that is an interesting development. There's also apps that can be used that I know my outpatient colleagues will recommend to patients. There's one called Rise Up, which is designed to help patients to keep track of their meals in a helpful way, and they can then submit those meal plans to food diaries to their therapist, and the therapist can then use that to work with the patient, and they provide a bit of support and through this kind of app that they can use on their phone or their tablet. And I think, so it's things like that which are a positive use of social media that can be incorporated into the existing treatment pathway that patients will have. I think those are the kind of steps that I'd like to see going forward. I think that's probably the main kind of gist of what I was hoping to say. I think, one of the websites that I found that was quite helpful when I was looking was a Young Health Movement. This is a Royal Society for Public Health document which is available online, looking at social media and young people. Again, this is a more general one, but some of the points that they had a sort of, a bit like the one that Tarika was talking about, a kind of points at the end of things, developments that they thought, and there were, I thought, some quite good ideas. Things like pop-up heavy use warnings on social media platforms that could be devised so that young people are aware of how long they were spending. And alongside that, indicators on photographs particularly to show that they've been digitally manipulated. Now, I'm not technically expert either, so I can't tell you how reliable or helpful that would be, but to me it seems intuitively quite good sense that, if there was a little watermark that could pop up on your photograph to show that this actually has been manipulated, I think that might be quite helpful. Some of the materials that my colleagues looked at when they were doing their work around the group, they show patients in the unit photographs to show the differences between photoshopped and non-photoshopped pictures, and it really is quite remarkable how much you can alter your appearance. So I think having some kind of sense that, that has been manipulated, that person does not look like that when they get out of bed in the morning, I think that would be really useful. Things like that there are ways of, for those of you who are on social media, I don't know if you've experienced that phenomenon where you've been scrolling through and you get an advert for something that you'd just been looking at the day previously somewhere else, and you think, that's a bit spooky, how did that happen? And technical people tell me there are ways of targeting advertising to your profile, and I think I find it irritating, but I also think it can be damaging. And wouldn't it be helpful if you could have ways of targeting help? So, for example, for people who seem to be looking at a lot of pro-anorexia websites or, clicking on links and making comments involving certain keywords, perhaps signposting to sources of help might be a possibility, and that's certainly something that the authors of this report had wondered about. I mean, there's lots of other things, and we'll stop in a minute because I think the important thing here is for us to have a debate. But, thinking about standard setting as well, there's a lot of blogs, and I know we've covered a lot of different types of social media. I haven't really touched on blogs, but certainly in terms of eating disorder, there are a lot of Thinspiration, Bonspiration, Pro-Ana, all these terms that get used to describe these blogs that people have written. Healthy eating is everywhere. You can. We're all aware of veganuary. People suggesting that we alter the way we eat. Now, some of those are very good, useful, helpful websites. Some of them definitely drift into being quite unhelpful and giving dangerous advice to people with regards to diet. And there's not an awful lot of information, or there's not really an easy way of checking how accurate that information or advice is. And I know my dietetic colleagues in the unit are very expert, and they really, it would be very helpful to have their stamp on, what is a website that I would want my teenage daughter to be looking at, and what is something that I think could be actually very dangerous. And so the authors of this report were also suggesting some kind of stamp of approval on food websites and things. But I think we're away from that. We're away from that being a possibility. There's a lot of there's a lot of research, training, technical development that needs to happen before we get to that point. And I think probably that kind of leads me on to my kind of closing point, which is that, Tarek and I both stood up here. We're both working with young people. We're both working with people with mental health problems. And we've both said we're not expert in this. And so I think we probably need to get more expert. We probably need more training. And I think that applies to mental health professionals, health professionals. I know when I was a medical student, we didn't have, I'm not going to give the kind of hundreds of years ago, we all had to write with a pen and we never had any kind of computers. But the reality is things have changed and we have to change with them, or we're going to get left behind and our patients are going to get a worse deal because of it. So I guess that would be my stance. I think being positive and proactive is the way forward, but with a really healthy amount of caution and concern, and just check the facts and try and make things better. So thank you.